have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. It's happening again. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the Missoula to my Montana.
That's definitely a statement. I'm the Unplugged Professor, and I saw an episode of Twin Peaks today.
For those who are just tuning in, this is a podcast where we run through the whole series. I have seen the show before multiple times, and my co-host, the Unplugged Professor, this was your first time seeing episode 14, otherwise known as Lonely Souls.
Yeah. Yep, definitely saw it.
Written by Mark Frost, directed by David Lynch.
Oh, you don't say.
In case you couldn't tell that might have been the case.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start with my opinions here.
Go for it.
This is my favorite episode in the show so far.
Okay, so far. Interesting.
I don't want to speak for things we haven't seen.
Uh-huh.
But this is my favorite episode in the show so far.
Okay.
Of the 14 episodes, including the pilot, however you want to count that in there, this is my personal favorite so far.
I can definitely see it. I think that maybe there might be a little bit extra value added since you had to hear some of my statements in the past.
I have had so much fun, but also so much difficulty. Knowing what happens in this episode, behind the scenes, I've been trying to, push the professor to watch this a little bit sooner, and I am so glad of the payoff, because those who've been sticking with us this whole time, or if you are listening now and want to go back in time, the theorizing that the professor has done has at some points been very correct, some points been very incorrect, but the discussion you've been having in the last few episodes about Tajimura, about Bob, about even Harold, it's all come to fruition.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't know how to feel.
It's like when your child gets old enough to leave the roost, and you're like, I'm so happy that my son and or daughter or non-binary child is going off to university, but at the same time, I'm going to miss them.
No, the thing is that it's more so like that, but at the same time, the child also had to guess what their parents were.
Some people have to go through those hoops in life, and it's not their fault. Such is the case of Laura Palmer.
Oh, boy.
So let's go ahead and just start with the Palmer and Bob situation. Let's blow that load right off the bat.
Okay, so we're going straight into the Palmers.
Straight to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Okay, controversially, this is one of the biggest parts. So, you know what? I don't even know how to navigate anymore. Why don't you take the lead on this one?
I love that the first scene we get in this episode in the Palmer household is with What a Wonderful World playing in the background. And, that's a very famous song, a very famous version of it. But I think this might be my favorite use of What a Wonderful World in any media I've seen.
Yeah.
It sets the tone for this particular scene so well, not even in the sense of it being 100% fitting as one might expect it. It's not like a scene of unconditional joy and appreciation, but it's that sense of something being amiss and almost an ending. Because it's this part where Maddie is talking with Leland and Sarah sitting next to her on the couch about the fact that she's going to be going back to Missoula, Montana.
Yeah, which we actually do start on a random portrait they have inside of their room over Missoula, Montana with the little moose before we just pan across their...
all these photos of Laura that are on the sill or the mantle, if you want to call that.
Which I was trying my best to find a Maddie picture amongst them.
I mean,
just
Maddie, Laura, what's the difference? Am I right?
If they can read each other's minds, I think that they might be pretty close.
Sure.
I saw one with what seemed to be Laura and Donna.
Correct.
And one that could be Laura and Maddie, but it's really hard to tell because it comes out a little bit blurry with...
I think considering the technology at hand, would they, in a 1990s TV show, be able to look at natural, having the two people who actually are played by the same actors next to each other? It'd be kind of uncanny. It'd be really interesting to see him pull off.
I wasn't trying to necessarily look for fully grown. But more so just using young female. There were the usual Mary-Kate and Ashley situations inside the past. So I imagine that there could be two people who look alike.
A parent
in
trap
that year.
situation, yeah. Okay. And then so we go from that What a Wonderful World playing in the background, panning over all the different Laura Palmer pictures. And then we get this sort of drawn out distance shot of Sarah, Maddie, and Leland on the couch. And it's shown for the most part from such a far away distance, slowly zooming in. We see that Maddie is wearing these kind of brighter blue, kind of like a bathrobe, it almost looks like.
Yeah, they're all inside their morning robes. It's in the middle of the morning, and they're drinking their coffee, reading the paper.
But I love the contrast with Maddie's light blue robe that has like a blue rose on it. And then to her left and right, you have Leland and Sarah in their sort of brown attire. She clearly pops as the bright blue rose in the middle of them.
You could say that she has a bit of innocence to her.
Mm-hmm. And she is talking about how she's sad to go and they're sad to see her leave, but she'll come galloping back again.
Yeah, she'll definitely have the energy for that. And that's a promise she'll keep. And we also appreciate the first shot that will come out. Actually, no, that's later.
Again, I'm going to move past this scene here in a second, but I just think, considering where this episode goes, I think establishing that first shot of Maddie talking to the Palmers about her wanting to, her sadness of leaving, and seeing Leland especially, but also Sarah, taking this very sympathetic, we love you, we'll miss you, sort of sincere appearance at least.
Yeah.
And because the next scene we have in the Palmer household opens up with the same record player earlier that was playing What a Wonderful World, but now it seems to have got to the end of the record and is stuck.
It is stuck. It seems to be skipping at the very end. It is literally, needle is right in the middle of the record.
Which tells me The Wonderful World might have a little hitch in it.
And it seems that Sarah Palmer has fallen and cannot get up as she is currently crawling through her household to the best of her ability.
Mm-hmm. And even earlier than that, we'll talk about Harold more in detail later, but we learned from the scattered pieces of Laura Palmer's diary that were all around Harold's area, more information about Bob, that Bob is a friend of her father's.
Yeah.
That Bob had been involved in molesting her at some young age.
Yep.
And indications in that moment would point toward Benjamin Horne as the likely suspect. But as the episode unfolds, we have a recontextualization.
I think that the most telling thing, and we'll talk about it more later, is that Ben dodges a question on whether or not he killed Laura, just simply saying that he loved her. So even in the middle of the episode, I felt it was just too obvious that it was not Ben. In this case, there's a double meaning here. There's a double way to interpret it. While it leads you initially to think Benjamin Horne, the whole friend of her father angle is a little bit different. Yep.
We get this ominous ambiance, and throughout the whole entire episode, you can tell, at least I could tell, that Lynch is behind this one based on how much darker the ambience is.
Yes.
There are so many moments where the music kind of comes out of nowhere and just starts blaring this sort of darkness behind it. And you get this with seemingly benign imagery that if it wasn't for the way it's shot and the way the audio is handled, it would just be a house. Because all it is just panning across a carpet and a stuck record player. That could be done in such a way where it's just a normal everyday thing.
Yeah.
But because of the music and because of the camera angles, like it's shooting the carpet almost like it's some sort of menacing scroll that's happening in front of you, just kind of panning across it. And then you see Sarah crawling down the stairs sort of, again, desperately, as you were mentioning earlier, saying Leland's name over and over again. We get an iconic shot of the ceiling fan. That ceiling fan from the pilot.
And there is actually a shot of a chair, which we also see the general angle of that chair, which has a blanket on it. And guess what pattern is on the blanket?
Actually, didn't catch that one.
Chevron.
Nice.
It is the spiky chevron. And this is kind of important in my eyes because
There's a few callbacks to that in this.
Yeah.
And again, I think for a lot of people who watch Twin Peaks, even though, season 1, episode 2, when they initially showed, aside from the international trailer, when they initially showed the Red Room and the Man from Another Place, even though it was like a one-time thing so long ago, that floor pattern, the red curtain, the way that felt is such a strong image that even though it's like 10 minutes of the show so far, and it happened like 12 episodes ago, I think it still lingers in a lot of people's minds as they're watching this. It's still recognizable.
Yeah, and I've been looking into the vinyls, which I'm hoping to order soon, the music vinyls. And if you look for all 3 of them, there are versions that have a chevron pattern for each of them. So,
Right. We see later, and again, I say I know I have all these different notes where it says like later this happens, later this happens.
Later.
Because it keeps cutting in and out of the Palmer house throughout the episode. I think we have maybe 4 different times where it starts with the Palmers and then goes into something else and then goes back to the Palmers, building the suspense, building this sort of tension. So at one point, we see Sarah going down the stairs. Then we cut to something else. We come back, and all of a sudden, Sarah looks up, and the pale horse materializes in front of her.
Which, by the way, with the pale horse that appears in Sarah Palmer's vision, as well as mentioned at the Log Lady intro, a pale horse is often recognized as the horse of the 4th and final horseman of the apocalypse, death. Which either alludes what's going to happen very soon after, or it could be the beginning of some sort of like apocalyptic event. Like things are just going to get definitely weirder around Twin Peaks.
Sure.
Which you said I was like a quarter through a few episodes
technically.
ago. So yeah, I don't think that like this is the only height of the series.
And also in the Log Lady intro, if you watch that with the episode, she does mention like, woe to those who see the pale horse. So even in the Log Lady intro, that imagery of the pale horse, whether you interpret it, mythologically as a sort of apocalyptic vision, that does seem very much up Mark Frost's alley. From what people tend to speculate, a lot of the parts of the show that tend to focus on mythology, supernatural elements, kind of a more spiritual nature.
Yeah.
A lot of it gets attributed to Mark Frost.
Which I appreciate.
He's a writer inclined to mythology. So the idea that this episode has him as the main writing credit and we have that pale horse, I don't think it's a stretch at all to suggest that there's probably some interpretation to be done involving the apocalyptic biblical pale horse.
No, I appreciate that, and sometimes you can really get it through the writing, just on how definitely, mysterious and strange things get. Now, my question for you is that, do you find Sarah Palmer to be part of the gifted or the damned?
I think if I answer that...
Oh, yeah, you already know this series.
I will be giving you too many things.
Okay.
So what I can say is that at the moment of the show, I would hardly call her life happy. She, from the very first moment we see her in the pilot, she is the entry point we have to the sadness of the show.
Yeah.
Back in the pilot, she's the one who first starts to put the pieces together in her mind that something might have happened to Laura. She's the one who calls her husband, who's currently at the Great Northern. She calls him in the pilot and asks him desperately where Laura is. She's the one who is screaming as the phone is like off the hook and the police are letting Leland know what happened. She's the one screaming into the phone. We've seen her have to get drugged up basically to stop having these anxieties and visions. She's consistently haunted. So from what I would say of what we've seen so far, she seems pretty damned.
Now, here's the thing, though. Like, everyone we've seen who has seen Bob does not seem to be, like, the more traditional sense of gifted. It seems like you have to be gifted and damned. Like, the two go together.
Well, they did say the gifted and the damned. They did not say the gifted or the damned. So if you want to take that language very, very literally, you could interpret it that way. It's not an either or. It's a combination.
Like, getting the gift also means damnation, which kind of makes you want to return the gift a little bit.
It's like a ham melt. You get the ham and the melt. You don't get one or the other. French fries and ketchup. You don't just get the ketchup. And we keep getting all these visual reminders of the record player skipping almost every time it comes back to the scene. It's almost like this is the thing linking us back to that mood and feeling just as much as the ambiance music in the background.
Yes.
So obviously reinforcing that record skipping as important. When we get toward the end of the episode, we get the big reveal, right? We get Leland standing in front of the mirror, kind of smiling, right? Very happy, almost giddy. And he looks into the mirror and we see Bob still. And there's a sense in which that stillness of just Bob staring back, I think is more effective than if he had been maniacally laughing, like an over-the-top Saturday morning cartoon villain.
He was still smiling, and I think it was
a slight smile, but it's a menacing, very slight smile.
I wouldn't even call it menacing. They were just looking at each other as if they were one and the same, just smiling at each other inside the mirror. And when they make that nice little turn, oh yes, old friends indeed. And when they make that turn, it is genuinely
oh yes,
chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss. and we get, Leland turning, kind of a close-up shot of just his face turning and the way his expression has changed. This is a Leland we've never seen as the viewers.
Yes.
This whole time, Ray Wise, you called him earlier in an episode, can't remember what one, you called him a beautiful madman, and I'm like, yep, he is, because I couldn't say how much of a madman he can be, but showing us just, and it's so important because if we're going to sell the idea of Leland, who previously up to this point we've known for being a grieving father, if we're going to sell the idea that he is the host of Bob, you have to pull it off in such a way that we're not going to feel a disconnect. We have to immediately buy into the idea that this person is capable of it. Mm-hmm. And I think without saying a single word, Ray Wise, just by turning and the way he looks, almost even toward the camera, sells that.
Yes, I agree. However, I must say, I'm probably just a horrible person in general, but when Maddie does come into the shot, just smelling burning or smelling something, and she comes in, Leland has this smile, and he just chases her down, You could almost say that it's like a father chasing down his child with a little bit of giddy. He's like, here I come! But
You're
then
right.
it kind of just shifts into Ray Wise, and it becomes less like that.
And that's something that I want to talk about overall with this episode. And we'll talk about it more when you and I start going through David Lynch's filmography.
Yeah.
Lynch is someone who often pairs very dark, morbid nightmares with this sort of humor. And you can look at it, it reminds me a lot of the situation where Albert was listening in to Ed's story about what happened on their wedding, shooting out Nadine's eye.
Yeah.
That you can listen to this story and you can be Cooper sitting next to him, being very sympathetic and saddened by hearing what his friend went through, or you can be Albert looking from a distance trying to hide your laughter.
Yeah.
Both are approaches to trauma and harm.
Yes.
People will look at it in different ways because it is so out there, it's absurd, and that invites both fear and humor, and a lot of times they mix in ways that you might be laughing at something that you normally wouldn't think is funny, and you might be afraid of something you normally don't think is scary.
Yes. And I think that some points of humor did come through in this for myself.
Well, even in the second viewing, we were watching it, and you were kind of chuckling your way through the murder scene.
That's because literally, like, Crazy Bob, just like when Maddie's just like courting, he's just like putting his hands out and just like curling his fingers, like, come on.
And I've never laughed at the scene, and I don't think that means one of our responses is invalid. I laughed a bit when I heard you laughing because it's contagious. Because I started, even just hearing you laugh, it made me notice the things that could be funny. Even though in my viewings, I've never laughed during this scene.
Yes.
I think it's one of the darkest and most horrifying murders ever on television. And that's still true, I think, over 25 years later. And I'm not someone who feels a lot of goosebumps or chills watching a scene. And I don't even think I ever have, like, watching this. But I've always kind of, even when I first watched this show, there was something different about this was shot, different about the way it was shot that kind of gave me a bit of almost reverence for the way it was done, that I can respect the degree it's willing to go, that this would have aired on, like, primetime network television in 1991 or 1992. Cheers was on the other network at the same time. Nothing against Cheers, but just this was before The Sopranos. This was before Breaking Bad. This was before the kind of modern era of grotesque and violent and darkness. And I think that this show accomplished it so well, partly because it comes out of left field. Granted, the show's had darkness before, but never this explicitly.
Now, mind you, this scene is definitely that sense of dark, and the best part is that at the beginning of this scene, when Maddie's coming down, a spotlight is shown on them during this act.
Yes.
Meanwhile, paralleled, we get the actual show going on around the Roadhouse. By the end of the scene, we are having like this extreme conflict between Leland and Bob, where effectively like Leland is just like clutching on towards Maddie, just saying, Laura, 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 just kissing her sweetly like a father would. And then there's the Bob side, which is much more sexual.
Do you view it as a conflict? So like an internal turmoil?
Yes, absolutely. I think that both of them are struggling, especially at the very end, where like it does show Leland, not Bob, but Leland says, you're going back to Missoula,
Montana!
Before like dashing her into the nearby portrait. So it's
Missoula, Montana.
So it shows that like Leland will be fully shown as Leland, but Bob will be completely in control. I'm sure that'll be the perspective outside as is, but it still is telling enough that whatever the viewer is seeing, sometimes Leland might not be Leland.
Well, and the way they did it in this shot is that there was like a spotlight that would hit Leland, and that's usually when Bob appeared. It's like the light brought him out or made him visible.
Yes.
And considering for viewers who, know the full breadth of the show, everything involving electricity and light in Twin Peaks, and even just the idea of a light being like fire, the idea that a light on him makes him visible, there's a lot you can do with that.
Yes.
And do you have any theories on that burning smell? Or any even connections?
Honestly, as far as it goes, like...
Because this is not the first time it's been mentioned.
Like, we haven't seen anything burn. Now,
No.
there might be something upstairs going weirdly, but Maddie specifically ran downstairs. So unless she was trying to escape the smell...
Yeah, it's coming from... Well, you're right. Either she's escaping it, or she's coming down toward it.
Yes, so that can be up to contention. But Bob has released a statement that ends with something along the lines of "Fire walk with me."
Yes. This isn't a spoiler because it's already happened in the past. Do you remember anyone else ever reporting the smell of scorched engine oil?
Oh, I remember the phrase. I'm probably going to see it in my notes and regret it later.
It's from quite a while ago.
It's scorched engine oil, and it was a weird one. Oh, yes, Jacoby!
And do you know why he smelled that?
Because probably Bob came around.
Because Leland came around.
Yeah, but either way.
Because Leland was going to go suffocate a Jacques Renault.
Yeah.
Which I think by this point you can have recontextualized a little bit.
So, yeah, in that sense, like, the smell might actually follow, because before we thought maybe it was just a disconnect, like, he smelt it beforehand, which maybe he was also assaulted by Leland earlier.
And again, that connotation of fire with Bob, because even when Leland was in the police station talking to Cooper and them, he talked about how the guy he knew as Bob back on his summer house in Pearl Lakes would flick matches.
Maybe just literally a fireman just walks around but is off camera the whole entire time. Fire literally does walk with him.
And that's, again, I mentioned it when we had that episode. The fact that Cooper is ready to just like walk by Leland when Leland's explaining about the guy Bob he knew at summer house at Pearl Lakes, Cooper does not stay around to question Leland, which I guess I just find mind-boggling in the sense of this is the only person who's claimed to have had like full conversations and known this person, immediately recognizes the face of the man that Cooper saw in his dreams, and he doesn't stick around to ask Leland questions.
Yeah.
And now that you know how important that is, I do wonder how differently things would have turned out if Cooper would have like, wait, you know Bob? Leland, you and I should talk more about this.
Yes.
And he didn't. I may not argue he's distracted.
Like, and there could be like other implications on like how Bob behaves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why Sarah would be around Leland for so long if there were hints of things like this going on. Maybe somehow it was hidden the whole time. Like Bob did not show himself to Sarah at times, or there might be some reason that Sarah won't speak. But we do know that Bob has some tendencies of doing some not so nice things.
Like inserting letters into people's fingernails.
Like, this is a stretch already. I have a few stretches this episode.
Oh, good.
But if, like, Bob has sexual tendencies and someone looks a lot like Laura Palmer, who knows what sort of history might have happened in the past that might have a link.
Yeah.
Now, also, I have a few things to say about Maddie, because, like, this is the point where people say, oh, well, at the very least, the people in my head. I'm not saying
the
you people
hypothetical,
listeners.
imaginary people.
The people in my head arguing are saying that this should be it. Like, Maddie is dead. There's no way, like, you can keep connecting this to Laura Palmer. There's one scene that I find very important, and I think it also contests conversations we had before. Maddie dies, and this is around the point in the Roadhouse where we see people start reacting. The most obvious, Donna, who says that, like, Maddie didn't tell her that she was going. And that might just be a personal thing, like she might have just not wanted to tell Donna whatsoever, or she might have found some personal repercussions. But she was around Donna the most, from what I recall, in the series thus far. And so not even mentioning that, that's odd. The most odd thing is that at the Roadhouse, Bobby's also there. And when Bobby is there and Maddie dies, Bobby has a strange reaction.
He almost looks like he's lost. Like, that's how I read it, at least. Like, he's looking around like he's almost out of place. There's something wrong here, and he feels it but doesn't know what it is.
Yes, that's the thing. But Maddie had no interactions with Bobby.
And now do you understand why I was so confused? And I mean, in the earlier episodes, I kept saying, like, a few times, like, Bobby should have had an interaction with Maddie. Bobby should have had an interaction with Maddie.
I disagree, because this, in the end, might be my key linchpin, pun intended, where... Why would Bobby...
No, that was a good one. I don't mean to be sarcastic.
Why would Bobby react after the death of someone he hasn't interacted with?
Can I throw go on. I have a curveball for you, but go on.
Unless, perhaps, that wasn't Maddie. That was the person that he actually did feel an attachment for. Someone that he did feel close for. And some strange residual Twin Peaksian reaction given to James, Donna, and Bobby,
3 people very close to Laura,
would have this strange emotional ripple effect.
The curveball I want to throw you and see how you respond to it.
Go for it.
I was going to save this for when we do our look back episode later, but I think that this is actually a good time to mention it, is that from what I read, and I believe this was in the Reflections, the Brad Duke book, brought up that Bobby was basically just randomly brought into this episode. He was just kind of on set, and Lynch was directing. He was like, he basically just called Dana Ashbrook over and said, you're going to be in this movie, you're going to be in this episode. And it wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. So from what those sources would believe, and I think it was Ashbrook himself, the actor, saying that he just was kind of on set when this happened. That means that it wasn't even planned.
I don't think that necessarily it may have been planned, but at the same time, we've seen Lynch put in hints to something that would either later do something, or maybe he might do the opposite, in which it's something to reflect on something in the past. So if he has a tool to utilize and throw him in and have him react out of anything, I think is telling.
And also just to clarify, I want to throw you that curveball, but for my own just sake of explaining myself here, I don't believe that something being done on accident or improv means it's not important or canon.
Yes.
If something is unintentionally done in a piece of media, it's still there.
Yes.
It becomes part of the show. So, even if it was an accident or random, you could argue that Bobby was there and it wasn't part of a purposeful decision. Purposefulness be damned. I mean, this is part of the show's narrative at this point. Bobby's there.
I think that I would be more doubtful on my personal idea that Maddie may have been Laura Palmer. If it weren't for that scene,
which is so interesting because it is something that could have not happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bobby being there is a fluke potentially.
Yeah, honestly, that may have just put some more doubt in my head, but this is something in which I think retrospectively communicates there's something weird between Maddie and Bobby, and I believe that connection is that there was something more with Maddie to begin with.
And while we're at the Roadhouse, do you mind if we just start talking about that whole part in general?
Yeah, go for it.
So one thing I wanted to mention with the Leland, Bob killing Maddie scene that ties in really well to this, I think, is that when the killing is happening, you mentioned it's kind of an internal conflict where it would transition to Leland, saying, Laura, Laura, my Laura, and he's carrying the body like he's dancing with her, right?
Yeah.
He's holding her and moving around to music that, again, is not happening. The record player is skipping. Maybe in his head he's hearing it. But, an interpretation that's commonly put out there, and I don't remember, and I feel like a fake fan if I'm wrong in the next episode it mentions it. I don't know if the show ever explicitly confirms it. Maybe it does. But a common interpretation of the man from another place saying that where I'm from, there's always music in the air, and the birds sing a pretty song. The person most commonly associated with dancing and singing and music is Leland.
Absolutely. I think that there's something telling that the music track just ends around the point that we see more Bob. But throughout the time that we see Leland at his most Leland is when he's singing at the piano, when he is just dancing around to a little bop on his little vinyl.
So I can't tell what I enjoy more. The idea that the music that Leland hears in his head, if he is hearing music that isn't actually playing, I don't know if I want to believe that he's still hearing What a Wonderful World while this is going on, or if he's hearing the music at the Roadhouse. Because it keeps cutting in between the Roadhouse and the scene that happens. The last shots we get of the episode, after Maddie is dead, are at the Roadhouse. And there's a connection clearly being made between them. So in my head, I don't think it's in a wrong way to look at it, to view that maybe in Leland's head, he's hearing the Roadhouse music that he's dancing to Laura with.
Yeah, honestly, and with some of the lyrics, I'm sure that there's something extra people can look into, because the song does shift around this point, where the lyrics go something along the lines of, "Dust is dancing in my space, a dog and bird are far away. The sun comes up and down each day." Mm-hmm. So, I know that I'm trying to dissect that myself.
Right, and I'll let you linger on that and stew over those words. We start with the... Go on, sorry.
I believe that the song is called World Spins.
That is the second song, correct?
Oh, yes.
So when we first enter the Roadhouse, Julie Cruz, who we had previously seen at the Roadhouse before, she's singing the song "Rockin' Back Inside My Heart." There's the red curtain behind her, which again, familiar imagery.
Yeah.
Even the opening shot we get is of the water reflecting the Big Bang Bar logo with the beer bottles kind of scattered around it.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of encapsulates a mood that the Roadhouse often gives off, that there's the beer bottles and cigarettes and kind of a trashy sort of griminess to it.
I mean, depends on the scene. Sometimes...
Right, but what I'm getting at, though, is that there's also beauty. Yes. Like, we see the beautiful, bright neon sign of the Big Bang Bar with the soft music in the background, and it's honestly a very pretty shot. It's a pretty shot of a little bit of water on some pavement surrounded by beer bottles. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of mood carrying us into the Roadhouse is interesting.
Yes.
It's not so simple as just being positive, just being negative.
Yes.
It's kind of beauty in this moment.
Uh-huh.
And as she's singing Rockin' Back Inside My Heart, we get James and Donna, and we'll talk about, like I said, we'll talk about Harold specifically later, but they're talking about Harold's passing in that moment. And James has the crumpled up peanuts, it looks like, in front of him, and he's telling Donna, it wasn't anybody's fault. He's a sick man. Everybody hurts inside. Again, kind of justifying that, Donna, you don't have to blame yourself for it.
Yeah.
And Donna says, his whole life was inside that house, and I violated that. Mm-hmm. I want you to talk about whether you think Donna is to blame for anything later. Okay. But I think it's interesting that we open up on that moment. It brings us back to Harold. And then right after that, enter Log Lady Cooper and Sheriff Truman, who sit and listen to the music. And, like, in their own way, they're feeling the music. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you noticed that.
Honestly, like, just seeing how they behave through this is enjoyable. We see the Log Lady kind of go to town at some of the nuts before she just listens to the song and slowly taps on her little log, if you will.
And she's the one that told them to even go there because there's going to be owls tonight.
Yes. And while she is just listening and enjoying the song, and the song shifts, her reaction slows, we can see that overall the biggest reactions are coming from either Cooper or the Log Lady, but Truman is primarily off on the camera.
Yes, I don't even know if it's clear that he's even aware.
Like, the most that we can see, which makes me believe that he's unaware, is when the song transitions, he goes in for some peanuts, and it's just casual. Like, if everything's shifting and the song is changing and everything's going strange, going to town on some nuts, I do not think is the reaction one would have.
So it seems like only... Because what we notice is that in front of the table, we get a shot, like, toward the stage, where when the music changes, and I guess it wasn't when the music changes, it's when the music stops, we see the people basically freeze in front of them. And later, after the song resumes, later in the Roadhouse, it kind of does a fading effect and everyone starts moving again, and it's almost like time stopped.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because in the background, I was wondering how come the sailors were so fidgety. Like, they looked pretty still, but it didn't look like they took the time to freeze the people behind Cooper.
And that's what I want to be clear. I don't think it's that time stop. I mean, I say time stop for shorthand, but I think it's more accurate to say that Cooper and the log lady, at least, maybe others, but for sure I would say those two, they were taken to a place outside of time. It reminds me to when Cooper first saw the giant. He asked, where did you come from? And where did you go, Cotton Eye Joe? No, where Cooper asked the giant, where'd you come from? And the giant says, no, where have you gone? Mm-hmm. So if the idea that Cooper in the hotel bed, looking at the giant in his own room, he went somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened here, where Cooper and the log lady went somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's still happening in real time.
Okay.
The sailors with the peanuts are still weird, though, because they should have been the same as the people in front, you would think, unless those sailors also have a spiritual connection, which, could happen. It could happen. And we see the giant appear, and he, tells Cooper, it's happening again.
Yeah.
It is happening again.
Which, by the way, during this time is when Maddie goes back to Missoula, Montana by, face crashing into the picture.
Yes.
And then we see Leo Bobland, kind of putting the letter O inside of Maddie's fingernail.
Right. So
which I don't think it's rabbit anymore.
It could be robot.
It could be still robot. Robot is in the running.
Or it could be Robert.
That means that we still got an ER to go through, so.
That's true. Still got the whole entire series of ER. I think that's a lot of seasons, too. That's going to be a tough binge watch for us. And then, after the giant fades away, after Maddie's dead, Cooper and Log Lady and the rest of them, they haven't seen it. They don't know officially. But we see over at the bar, Senior Drool Cup.
Senior Drool Cup comes over, and he walks over to Cooper, and this milkman ends up just letting you know that he's so sorry.
In the words of Big Ed, home of the gas farm, he says, "I'm so sorry."
Now, it's the owls are mentioned. The log lady brings them. There's no actual, full confirmation on where the owls are, who the owls are. But
the sailors are probably the owls.
But the band seems ominous in their key change in the transition, and the milkman stops to say that he's sorry. It seems like the milkman was present for just the start of the giant and this point of the giant. Whether there's some sort of interconnection or some parasitic value to that,
sure.
Seeing as he's been both at the Great Northern as well as here where the milkman is, that can come into question. If we are to assume that the owls are very similar to someone like Bob or Mr. Gerard. Now, mind you, those ones were more direct in full possession. I don't think the milkman went on the middle of the stage during the act and then spoke to Cooper and then ran back down to the bar. Though that would be humorous to see.
Right.
Yeah, and there's also notable characters like Bobby, Donna, and James. And if we are to assume the owls are similar to these parasites, if not these parasites, we also can't discount these characters thanks to Leland.
And we also, I don't think we see any of them when Cooper and the log lady go to another place. So we don't know if they're also going there or not.
Yes.
Which is why I don't want to discount or... discount's not the word I'm looking for. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't want to say either way whether or not they were taken anywhere else, just that we know for sure Cooper and the log lady were. There's only two we really can be confident in. And the sailors.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I would want to mention here, because we've established that, Leland may or may not be dancing to the music there, which I think is significant if we view it that way. But the last thing is I love the way this episode ends with the music continuing to linger. It shows that almost slow motion close up of Julie Cruz, the singer, where her face kind of is illuminated by this red light. Then it goes to Cooper, who's been looking at this, and then it transitions as Cooper fades away to the red curtains. And it's interesting because you think places of great spiritual energy, I don't think normally a old hotel run by a shady guy who is involved in drug money and arsonery and basically child prostitution.
Yeah.
That hotel and a old bar in a small town and some random house of some, middle-class family, those are areas of great spiritual, energy.
Yeah.
And I think that the choice of that is so interesting because Twin Peaks is a show that elevates the mundane. Mm-hmm. It elevates things that we already encounter, but gives them a certain energy and vividness that, again, I mentioned before, you normally wouldn't feel afraid seeing, a shot of carpet or a shot of a ceiling fan in a house. But again, I think that's a credit to Lynch as well as every other writer on this show, but especially Lynch in this episode. We mentioned earlier that James and Donna are primarily talking about Harold Smith when they're not, mouthing the words to the songs at each other.
Yep.
Let's go to Harold Smith. Let's go to him. You have had... Actually, you describe it yourself. What have you thought of Harold from kind of when you first met him to now? What are your thoughts on Harold Smith?
Harold started as a very, I'd say almost soft-spoken shut-in. He was someone who kept himself completely reserved, but opened himself up a little when Norma came around, possibly as a reminder of Laura. And he seemed to keep on opening up little by little when it came down to these interactions. But primarily, he'd tend to his flowers as well as make notes and possibly visit with others trying to make this living journal. Harold is horrifying, but at the same time, I don't know how someone who purposely tries to stay away from absolutely anything would interact socially or in general, since he seems to have a very large reaction to the outside world. And by the end of it, we see that after the Donna encounter, his home is completely wrecked. We see pages of books strewn about the floor with broken flowers, and inside the planting room, we see Harold hanging, apparently with a note on him.
Which the note said in French, and I'm going to butcher this, J'ai une âme solitaire.
Which means?
I'm a lonely soul. Which the name of this episode is Lonely Souls. I think that's very interesting, considering that the majority of people, the biggest thing in this episode is probably involving Maddie and Leland. They didn't call this episode Broken Record. They didn't call it Pale Horse. They didn't call it Missoula, Montana. They call it Lonely Souls. But even though it's specifically Harold that has that note, it does seem like that is a sentiment that can be applied to more than just him.
Okay.
You can certainly do something with that idea.
Here's the thing. There's a larger question here, and it's whether or not, with this note, is this something that was put on by Harold, considering himself a lonely soul, or do we consider an outside influence?
And that is another question I was going to ask you is, if you believe that the conditions we find Harold in and find his place, do you believe that was Harold's own doing or someone else? Something else?
I think if it was just the notes thrown onto the floor, I would have more to contest with it. But Harold's last reaction we see before this instant is he is tending to his flowers while amongst anguish. Now, it could be potential that he could throw them out in a fit of rage and betrayal. I don't see that in Harold. I think that these things have been something he's tended to for his own personal reasons. They are the things that is closest to him, and I do not see Harold necessarily completely going into this fit without more reasons. Now, it's been a mystery on why Harold has shut himself in, and he reacts to the outside world in a very bad way. Now, with Harold, there's a few options here in my mind.
Right.
I am a lonely soul being in a separate language. At first, I was thinking to myself, there's a scene later with James who has surrounded himself with crushed nuts onto his counter space. I think that if there was, amongst those three people who interacted with Harold and had something of a potential reason to re-encounter them, possibly James, but the way that he reacts afterwards makes him less likely. Also, I don't know whether or not he knows other languages, I don't think that those are the sort of things he would
We
leave
don't know a
behind.
lot about Harold.
Yes.
We know that he's from another town, but that's still an American town. We don't know. He could have been someone who traveled the world before whatever happened to him. He could have learned another language for a variety of reasons. He's obviously interested in writing. He's interested in stories. Perhaps he's, someone who studied many langues.
Now, there's also...
But we don't know.
Now, there's also other people that he's interacted with. Again, going back to the trio. Maddie, I think maybe more eloquent in some respects than James. And she has interacted with Harold before. She knows where Harold is. And she specifically does not tell Donna about her leaving. It seems like she's not really talking to Donna after that event. There might be a reason behind it. It might involve this Harold incident. Who knows? There's also the question on these parasites, these owls, whether or not maybe Harold himself was afflicted by something of a parasitic nature, or James or Donna, who happen to have a parasitic nature within them. I think it's more strongly in Harold just from the way he reacts inside and outside, and that means of distorted voice. So I don't think it was entirely Harold's action. I think that there had to be an outside force that ended Harold, especially in the way that he has, especially when he felt tainted by the end of his interaction with Donna.
And listening to this, I would love to share all of my thoughts and all of my feelings on that. But I think one of my favorite things about getting to do this podcast with you is letting you run free with your ideas, because no matter how right or wrong certain things are, those elements that you're drawing out are in the show open for interpretation. And I think that you illuminate things without even realizing it sometimes. Yay! Right? So even though Harold has died, that doesn't mean, we could just say whatever you want about him, because if I suggest certain things, that could imply something does or doesn't happen later. So what I will draw to your attention, because I want you to have more to chew on, do you remember anyone else saying the phrase "J'ai un âme solitaire" before?
I remember a child speaking French next door.
The Tremons. So the grandson, who was played by David Lynch's legitimate offspring, next door magician person, had said that phrase before Donna had even met Harold.
Yes.
Make of that what you will, but this is the second time we've heard it now. Again, make of that what you will.
Yes.
Last thing I just want to mention, because again, I don't want to get into my theorizing right now.
Of course.
I promise there will become a later time in the podcast where, once we're done with everything Twin Peaks, it's all open to me. You will have to suffer my theorizing.
Yay.
But for right now, I appreciate what you offered. I just want to throw out a little bit of a praise here, though. One of my favorite pieces of music from Twin Peaks is Harold's theme. And it's not a theme that gets used a lot, but I really, really enjoy Harold's theme. It was actually something I was considering back when we first were planning this podcast. That was an alternative I was thinking of using in our intro, instead of using the eventual track we decided to go with. And I'm glad we chose one we did, but Harold Smith his theme has always been one of my favorites.
Okay.
There's a tinge of sadness to it and otherworldliness that I really enjoy. And the version we get of it in this episode, as it scrolls through and pans through all the, torn diary pages and the flowers, the version we get of Harold Smith theme with that echoing percussiveness, there's that sense of urgency added to it. I really enjoy the mood that brings to the scene. As Hawk enters into this and sees this and reflects, good thing Andy wasn't here.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So a couple other lonely souls in this episode are used for part of comic relief. But again, mentioning earlier, even within the comedy, there's darkness, and within the darkness, there's potential comedy.
Yes.
So we get Leo and we get Nadine. Two people who, ever since really the ending of season 1, beginning of season 2, haven't been the same.
Nope.
And are both in altered states of being that have left the others around them trying to figure out what to do. So in a section I very eloquently wrote in my notes as Bobby and Shelly and Leo and Norma and Ed and Nadine and Snake, I'd like to talk about some of those moments.
Featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Yes.
Of partial potential levity. So we open up, the party's over at the Briggs Johnson house, if that's what we're going to call it. And the decorations are all gone. It's the day after. And we find out that they only have $42 for the month.
Yep.
Which Bobby optimistically says that's a good start.
Meanwhile, Shelly is a little bit upset and says, like, yeah, we can't just live off $42. We see then for just a moment, like, Bobby's just like,
I can't keep telling my mom and dad that I'm staying at Mike's.
Yeah,
that sounds like a you problem.
Yeah, I got economics class coming up, and
as you know, I go to a school. You haven't seen it since the first episode in the pilot, but I do have homework to do.
And Shelly just makes it clear, it's like, I meant me and Leo. Like, there's almost like this tinge of like Bobby still trying to find something advantageous to Bobby. It seems like
the
Bobby
visual
is very...
storytelling here is fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't notice it until watching the scene for the rewatch for our podcast. But if you look at the way everyone's positioned, the three are sitting at the table at first. And Leo, because of the chair he's sitting in with his like wheelchair, he almost looks like he's elevated in a high chair, which either evokes the idea of like an infant, but also like a throne. Like he's noticeably higher than the other two in the chair at the table, and his feet are not touching the ground. He's like above dangling, meaning he's kind of looming over the conversation, which to me elevates him in a sense of power. He's higher up.
Yeah.
But then as the scene continues and Shelly starts to get more assertive with Bobby, she gets up and stands, making her the tallest person in the room. And if I take that visual storytelling very literally, the entire time, Bobby is the smallest. Bobby is the one closest to the ground. Bobby is the one that looks the weakest here. And that doesn't bode well for his, machismo. I don't know if that's even the word I'm looking for here, but his attitude that, that's a you problem, Shelly. I don't have to worry about that. I'm going to take care of it. Bobby's got you. Considering how much season 1 built up Bobby as this sort of impulsive guy who is going to take care of Shelly, Shelly realizes, at least in this moment, you're not doing anything.
But the thing is that he's also incredibly subservient. As soon as like at first he's just like trying to find a little bit of an out for himself from this like stressful situation. But once Shelly is like standing up and is showing some resistance to that, that's where he's like, okay, calm down. Look, we got this. I can help handle it. And then when Leo starts making sounds,
loud screeching, it feels like it's like a meme sound. Like it's something you ever heard of that? You've seen that meme? This is gonna date this podcast. You've seen that meme float around where it's like the ancient Egyptian mummified body, and they found a way to like make the sound from the body or whatever, and it has like that scream effect.
No.
Oh. This comment I make, he's gonna have two responses in the listener. Either it's gonna be like, okay, I know the reference, and then like mild entertainment that I made a reference, or they're just gonna have no clue what I'm talking about, and neither one of those is. Hey, I'm doing it for me, okay? I'm making this reference for me here.
It's fine.
But yeah, like loud screeching noises after Bobby says that, Leo couldn't have been broke. He had to have money somewhere. So as if like reacting to that, Leo starts screeching and then spitting. And then the moment I have been waiting for. I have been building this moment. I have been planting the seeds in the garden ever since like episode 2 that Leo needed a new pair of shoes. I have been referencing new shoes for so long, and finally, we get them.
New shoes.
Oh, it's finally here. And then Bobby, after the screaming and the new shoes, he's like, that was a burp. He probably has gas. Don't worry about it. And again, it's that dark humor of like, you mentioned in the last episode, we get almost like, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees kind of scariness coming from Leo in a way that he never had before. There's a sort of monstrousness to him. And to undercut that with Bobby, like, it was just a burp. Don't worry about it. And the new shoes thing, it's these clashing emotions of, am I scared of him or is this funny?
Which, by the way, after he does discover this, Bobby thinks there's a lead. He takes the receipt for like getting shoes repaired, and he just goes down and says like, "Yeah, Leo, if you end up helping us out, I'll buy you a whole shoe store." Like there's a sense like he has to like give in order to receive either like protection against the person or affections from a person. It seems that he tries to play it up so that no one's really against Bobby.
Do you feel that Leo, in his state, knows what he is doing and is responding and is making the sounds and mentioning the shoes on purpose? Or do you believe it is completely involuntary, just the like happenstance, or the third option that like some outside force is controlling his mind or something.
I think that Leo is trying to make some of these reactions, or at the very least, they're surface level on his mind.
Like when he says new shoes, does he know what that means? And what's his intent if he does? Is he trying to help them? Or is he just hearing money? Oh, I know where I got the money. Shoes. And doesn't even know he's helping them.
Like, it could lean on either one, really, because it might just be surface level thought, and while he is trying to recover, that might come through. But there's also that one glancing scene that we saw from the prior episode. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much Leo is conscious through this, but right. I do think at the very least he is trying to lead them. Whether or not it's for like Leo's benefit, being like, I'm stuck in the state, if there's just $42, that's not going to be good for me. Mm-hmm. Or if it is going to be a case in which he's having Bobby lead down a trail that might be good or bad for Bobby, that's up to question. Like, before, we didn't really get much of Leo other than Leo trying to help Leo.
I do think it's such an interesting subversion of the soap opera trope that Twin Peaks fell into earlier with Ronette. The idea of someone, falling into a coma is often used in like a soap opera, almost as like an excuse to temporarily remove their character while they can focus on other plot lines. Maybe the actor needs to go do something else so they don't keep him around. Yeah. Ronette went into a coma for so long, and we still aren't hearing from Ronette very much. I've mentioned that before, that I was hoping again season 2.
We got a little bit.
A little bit of it. But yeah, if you remember when we did our season 1 retrospective, I mentioned that if I had not known where the show's going, one of my hopes would have been more Ronette. Mm-hmm. And I would be disappointed in that at this point. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying, though, is that Ronette went into that legitimate coma. But I think in Leo and in Nadine, we see a spin-off of that where it's like, okay, they're not in a coma. But like, what if after the accident, they go home with these people and the effect that they have in their altered conditions? And taking two very different characters, Leo and Nadine, and giving them two very different responses. Again, it's sometimes used for comic relief, but I think even more than that, it just creates a very interesting type of conflict that further makes this a bizarre soap opera.
Now, mind you, I would like to return back towards the Leo situation because I'm sure we have plenty more to talk about.
Yes, we'll return when Snake returns.
We will.
But in the meantime, do you mind if we do talk a little bit about
Nadine,
the diner, basically, the diner scene? It. So we get this really, I think, very comforting scene between Norma and Shelly, where Shelly is apologizing. She says that she loves Norma. She loves working there. She doesn't want to let her down. And Norma, like the mother-like figure that she is, reassures Shelly that she's not letting her down. As soon as Shelly's able to work again, she'll hire her back in. Just don't try to work anywhere else, and we'll bring you right back. And it's a really touching scene, I think. Again, we don't see a lot of Shelly and Norma, but they've definitely, in the moments we've had, they have a kinship.
Yes.
And it's a very close relationship, and I think it's important to see Shelly connecting to someone that isn't Bobby. Yeah. Just for a little bit, give her own relationships.
Yes, I agree. I think that overall, I enjoy the dynamic that both Norma as well as Shelly have.
And then out of nowhere, ripping through our soundscape.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
That is exactly what it sounds like. Is a sudden music cue of like a 50s like rock and roll jam. And during this whole scene, the music changes like 3 times. I think Twin Peaks, like we know it's a very music inclined show. There's almost always some kind of ambience or music happening in the background of the series right now. But the fact that in a David Lynch directed episode, you get 3 different songs in one location, all 3 with very different moods, and there's not even like really much of a transition. They just kind of cut into it. It creates a very jolting feeling that I think is unique.
Angelo Badalamenti, you're working overtime today. We need to splice multiple bits of music together.
See, you're going more for like 40s old-timey radio host, and he goes down for the touchdown, and he makes you're going for like that kind of voice. How do I do? You gotta like summon it first. You're like, Angelo Badalamenti. Angelo Badalamenti.
I like that. That's the thing. You chant out Angelo Badalamenti because it seems like a literal summoning of his voice.
One chance out between 2 worlds. Angelo Badalamenti.
Regardless, though.
Badalamenti, walk with me. Anyway, we get the new music cue, and in comes Nadine with Ed. And it just like cuts through all the emotion of that moment. Again, it's that emotional whiplash that I love about the show at times, where you have Norma and Shelly in this very heartfelt, motherly moment, and then in comes, Norma's love interest for, ever since high school, basically, with Nadine in this altered state of thinking she's a high school student, which further, again, it's your high school crush and love paired up with the high school version of the girl who married your high school love. And it's just like cutting into it. And we see, Norma and Shelly have never encountered Nadine like this yet. Mm-hmm. So we see their reactions where Nadine almost looks at Ed like, the sense I get is when Ed says that, I think it's Ed or it's Nadine, I can't remember. Basically, it's revealed to Shelly that Ed had previously told Nadine that Ed and Norma broke up. Because, again, at the memories that Nadine has, she thinks those two is still dating, so they need to break up before they can be together and live in the same house. But the way that Norma looks at Ed, I get the feeling of it's like, this was our chance. You could have just told Nadine that we're not broken up.
I think that there might even be more layers to it because remember when Norma went off with Hank and just disappeared. Mm-hmm. That might have been an assumption from Hank at the time. So maybe Nadine is pulling back memories from then and Ed just threw off the excuse while Nadine is asking well, aren't you still with Norma? But thinking Norma is gone, he'll be like, yeah, we broke up. Mm-hmm. As just an excuse. So this could have not have been just a triggering on Nadine's head. Just think about how Ed would speak and react while drunk and upset and just at the world.
I imagine Ed's been drinking. I imagine it.
He drank in the past. It's clear that I was drunk before. I think that Ed is staying sober throughout the reactions here because I don't think anyone...
here, yes. I just believe that ever since he got Nadine back, he's probably drinking a little bit.
No, I don't think that because in the end, having any sort of influence while Nadine is like this, I want to be at the top of my game if Nadine is going to leap at me.
That's fair. I could see that too.
But yes, I think that Norma has this little look of betrayal. I think that she catches on a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
And then just seeing that was the reaction might have been a look of oh, so that's what you told her.
Yeah.
So.
And then meanwhile, Shelly's expression is kind of just confusion and then a little bit of wow, this person's crazy kind of face. And I think that actually is very in character because, again, small detail, but way back when we had the funeral of Laura Palmer, there's the scene where Leland jumps on the casket of Laura Palmer, which has totally been recontextualized for you right now. But in that scene, we get to a footage later of Shelly in the diner telling guests at the diner, customers, about that scene, and she was mimicking it with her hands going up and down with the casket and laughing about it, making fun of this man's suffering.
Uh-huh.
I think it's in character then that Shelly tries to play along with it, but you could tell she's dying inside of laughter.
Uh-huh.
Shelly, that's how she responds to things like this. Mm-hmm. It's not a very big part of her character, but it is consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of cool to see that, consistency brought back here. And then as they're talking,
but before that, she does order the chocolate shake,
yes.
And Ed corrects saying I'd actually like a coffee. So the coffee and chocolate shake. By the way, 25 cents for a coffee and free refills.
Hey,
great deal. I see why Toad goes there often.
I have a feeling that if we go there now, in the actual diner, it's probably not going to be so cheap.
Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe they kept it the same. But I was going to mention that as they're talking here, Nadine isn't even sure if the house they're staying in. She's like, is it your parents' house or mine, Eddie?
That's right.
Ed's like, that's right. And you could just tell he's just so done with this. And not long after...
He is taking the bull by the horns, but he's still on the ride.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of the bull, Nadine is firmly grasping her milkshake.
Which, by the way... she says, I'm so happy before the ice cream shatters.
So happy I could break things.
I think that her elation as well as that sort of line shows maybe something is starting to try to break out on something that may not be so happy.
She says she's just been clumsy lately.
Yeah.
And then she says I could just kiss you to death.
Yeah, while her hands are bleeding, and she's so fascinated by the blood and chocolate milkshake. As soon as she is done smothering Ed with a kiss, and she goes back to the chocolate milkshake.
She starts
and my first
pushing
thought,
it. At the end before the camera cuts, she's pushing the milkshake on the counter.
I'm just thinking to myself Nadine, or in just Ed's voice, now Nadine, please don't touch with your bleeding hands the damn chocolate shake.
Yeah. Speaking of chocolate shake, we get our friend Snake
What?
They rhyme.
What?
Chocolate shake, our friend Snake.
Yeah, I get why it's a rhyme.
It's called a brilliant transition.
Sure.
We get Snake back after so long away from Snake.
Do you know how Letterman jackets work, by the way?
What
He
do
has
you
the
mean?
number 36 on the front of his jacket, but then there's 74 on his side of his jacket. I assumed it would just be like the number for like the player of the team, and it would be a consistent number. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what the number would be, unless it's like
Maybe it was like
his parents in 76 was their graduating year, but that doesn't seem right.
maybe it might be a hand-me-down, like
That's
literally
the
like
best I can come up with of 76.
yeah, and then
Because if it's the 30s, then it's his grandpa, very old grandpa.
I think that maybe it might just have been his father's Letterman jacket. He's got the 76 for the year, and then number 36
that's
was his
the best
mother.
I can come up with.
Yep.
And really, I
oh,
shouldn't-
74. Sorry, I should be more accurate. It says 74 and 36.
Yeah, and I guess I shouldn't say 36 would be very old because this would have been like 1991. So, you know, it could be either way, I guess. I don't know if they had Letterman jackets like that in 36 during the Great Depression.
I think
but
with the number 74, it's more
makes
accurate.
more sense. But we get Snake, and we get confirmation that it's been implied, and we kind of guessed it by this point. But Bobby clearly does know that Hank was the one that shot Leo. Like, no doubt. Confirms it to Snake. Which I almost wonder if that's why Snake was brought back for this scene, was an excuse for the show to confirm that. Which previously would have been hinted at, but didn't know for sure. So that adds more complications that Bobby knows that information on Hank.
Honestly, for his facial reactions, I'm just glad to have Snake back in general.
I'm always glad to have Snake back. They find inside of that boot a tape recording, a cassette tape, and at that moment where they find it, a mini cassette, Leo bangs his head back against the wall. I don't know how you want to interpret it. Maybe the cassette is a mixtape and it's just got head banging kind of music.
Which, by the way, like they end up complaining, like you keep saying new shoes, but these are damn old shoes. So
Yes.
yeah, that's
He
also
wants new shoes.
He wants new shoes.
Man, maybe we're not done making that reference. We'll have to see. And, you know, Bobby, optimistically, again, it's not money, but who knows?
Now here's
Opportunistic here.
here we go back into the conspiracy corner. Do.
That's our theme?
Do,
I know
do,
you
do,
mentioned
do.
last time we might get a theme. We've had a few days to come up with a theme, and that's what we're going with.
I had no time between work and this podcast and editing, so I'm sorry. I'm working on it. This is the workshop.
I rushed the professor into watching this episode ASAP, so
yeah.
you're forgiven, but by next time.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
But new shoes is brought up by Leo, and we end up finding an old pair of shoes, but it's still significant enough. We find a tiny tape on the inside of it. But earlier, we did find new shoes with Circle Brand, which fits Mr. Gerard's business. Now, like, with Mr. Gerard, we already know, like, he has a connection as Mike, who is a parasitic force.
Who occasionally goes into Philip Gerard for the express purpose, according to him, of stopping Bob.
Now, with this shoe salesman, with the same branding, and Leo having these new shoes, an obsession with new shoes, it's possible Leo might have a connection with either Mr. Gerard or even as far as Mike. And especially with, like, Laura's drug habits and involvement with Bob, like, it seems that between these parasites, there seems to be some sort of connection with, like, relative drugs. We have Mr. Gerard with his special combination drug to stave off Mike.
Laura and cocaine.
Yep, we have a similar color alteration to Ronette's little bag before we find a letter inside of her nail. Oh, actually, not a letter being inside her nail, but when she's reacting.
I know
We
what you
saw
mean.
the letter far before. Laura Palmer in general. Just Laura Palmer in general is connected to drugs. And we've got cocaine with a potential connection with Mike and or Mr. Gerard dealing with these drugs. There's something in which so far Mike has been somewhat of an ally to Cooper. I don't know for how long, especially since Leo hasn't exactly been coming off as an ally for good or justice lately.
Just because Mike is against Bob, if we take his word for it.
Yes.
If we believe him, just because Mike says he's against Bob doesn't mean he's your friend.
Yes, exactly.
So far, it could be a mutual alliance for the meantime. We don't know.
So far, that seems like a big thing that we have not been exploring as of late. And with these new shoes, I'm excited to go down this rabbit hole.
Of drugs
And discover more. But yeah, between the drugs, between the parasites, and between the shoes, it's all weird.
Yeah. Well,
Good weird.
Good weird. That's a way to describe a lot of people's perceptions of Twin Peaks, right? Speaking of good weird and Mike, we get our opening shot. You know, we're going a little out of order here.
It was so good.
The beginning of this episode,
which, by the way,
starts with not just one lonely soul, but like 6 of them standing in front of the reception desk where Lucy normally is at.
Yeah, which, by the way, later in the episode, don't know when it's going to come up again. We have a new person at the desk. It's no longer a mustache man.
Hey, whoever's there that day, I guess.
But it is a dusty blonde-haired man who is behind the desk. So it looks like everyone's taking shifts.
Yes.
What concerns me more is that, like, we saw Andy there one day. We saw Andy react to the phone. We haven't seen really Lucy, and it seems that at least in this scene, Andy's still at the police station.
Yeah.
So I don't know where that thread is going. But yes, going back.
So we get Hawk, Gordon Cole, Cooper. I'm going to say Mike because that's currently the one in charge of the body. Andy and then Sheriff Truman all standing in a row in front of the counter, drinking their coffee. Some of them are eating donuts. Some of them are just holding donuts. Not eating them, just holding them, feeling the weight of them in their hand. Reasserting that idea that they do this as a regular thing.
Yeah.
It is a comical scene, though.
Oh, it is beautiful. It's effectively, it's as if it's trying to address the audience, just trying to catch them off on, like, big plot points between each of them. Like, Mike goes off on his little aside, just talking about...
Well, yeah, and it's funny because it's simultaneously, yes, it's recapping for people who either... forgot what happened last episode because it would have been a week ago, or just, people who didn't see the last episode. He recaps the message he said, like, verbatim from the last episode about the Great Northern. But it's also, I think, comic relief because, yes, it is just expositioning again. But the fact that he's just saying the same things over again, and they already all heard this. I just imagine everyone else is just like, yep, we know. And he's just... hunched over saying that.
And then Truman is just like allows like, okay, you got those papers to check out Harold's place, right? Yep, I'm going there right after this cup of coffee.
Yeah, that can wait. No urgency.
And then it's like Cooper just goes on and is like, oh yeah, speaking of which, about that one bit of information over like the pieces of the diary that were found, right, Gordon Cole? I'm saying the information out loud. And I'm saying how there were traces of this diary off to the side.
It's a great way to handle recapping.
It is, but at the same time, I was waiting for like all of them to just look at the camera at once.
Yeah.
It was a fun scene to say the least.
And then we get a few of that group go over to the Great Northern, which is the place that, again, Mike has believed there's that source of evil. Bob has been there for like 40 years. And
I'm sorry.
I hear? What is the noise?
Oh, I'm sorry. As you were trying to describe, I'm just trying to invoke the emotion of like 1,000 bouncy balls bouncing through the northern.
See, I thought you might have been the spirit of Ben Horn stomping his way through the hallways aggressively toward the camera.
I think that if it goes da-da-da-da-da-da, that makes it sound more like Ben Horn is skipping through the hallways. Or galloping. Both would invoke different information, but no, he's charging through
and then Benjamin Horn voices the words many Twin Peaks fans have asked themselves many times. Will somebody please tell me what the hell is happening here?
Yeah, because they are using Mike to sort of just try to detect the suspect that would be at the Great Northern.
And amidst all this chaos and noise, he's basically like a sorting hat, like a Hogwarts sorting hat. They just put people in front of him. No. Wait, are you an Asian man or are you 3 kids in a trench coat? Anyway, no.
Which, by the way, I do really enjoy like the thing with like the Tojimura confusion and just like Tojimura's assistant, just kind of like just bringing him back a few steps, but still watching off to the side.
And as Benjamin Horn is there, we see like Mike have this very strong reaction. He starts like reaching toward his missing arm.
Which, by the way, it might be connected towards like with just Benjamin Horn being in the vicinity, or it just might be like Gerard and Mike fighting. It's not really clear. It's just, regardless, Mr. Gerard fidgeting horribly, reaching for the arm, and just going crazed.
Which, again, would it lead a first-time viewer to believe, ooh, is it Ben?
Yeah.
Is it Ben? Because Ben is approaching.
Yeah, and there's just this point in which, like, Cooper even believes that is the case. He reconstitutes the idea of with chemicals he points, and thinks that's possibly him. I thought that would just be too obvious, and especially...
Well, this episode shows us a lot of hints about Benjamin Horn possibly being the one.
Yes.
Before it obviously unveils that it's not. We get early in the episode Audrey, talking to him. It opens up the shot with a close-up on the fireplace. Again, fire. right? Our visual language, fire, walk with me. There's a sense of connection there that, it opens with fire, and then it goes to Ben. Well, Audrey's over here confronting him. She says, Daddy, I know about One-Eyed Jacks. And he's kind of playing aloof like, well, okay, well, what do you mean? She's like, no, I understand. I know about Blackie. I know about Emerus Battis. I know about Laura. I know about Ronette. I know about you.
Yes.
Just firing, to the point where, Ben can't wiggle his way out of this. Spells out exactly what she knows. And she even goes so far as to say, remember Prudence? I wore a little white mask. And you could just see that moment of dawning realization on Ben as he processes, that's what's happening here.
And I think that in the end puts a chink enough in like Ben's armor that he could have just played dumb the whole time. He could have just said, Audrey, get out of my room. But we've seen
all these power plays, all these different moments where he's confronted with people, and no one's disarmed him like Audrey just did there.
Yeah, he just like shambles. He just like realizes, I've done this to my daughter.
You can see him decompose in the chair.
And now, the daughter deserves some more answers.
He says, ask away. And he does not. There's a little bit of dodging, but this is the most we've ever seen him give up everything.
Yes.
He admits he owned One-Eyed Jack for 5 years. Which, again, knowing the timeline of events, the way Twin Peaks time moves, that's an eternity. He knew Laura worked there for a brief time. He claims at first he had no idea she worked there. Battis had sent her without his knowing. But when he did find out, Audrey asked him very plainly, did you sleep with her? And he doesn't say anything. He just ignores it for a while. And she has to get a little more force on repeat.
I would argue that he's choking on it for a while more than ignoring it.
And there's open to interpretation, but I think that's a valid way to look at it. He doesn't answer, and then eventually, with a long, heavy pause, yes. And then she very quickly, Audrey does not hesitate to go to the next question, did you kill her? Even though Ben takes a while to answer, she doesn't take very long to process and move forward. It's almost like, I think, in the time that she's had at One-Eyed Jack's, and since then, she's had enough time to prepare herself for this conversation with her father.
Yeah.
She is ready to accept the worst case scenario. I think she goes into that conversation knowing that he might have slept with Laura, knowing that he might have killed her, and I don't think he could have said anything that would have surprised her. So she doesn't need time. She doesn't pull any punches. She asks, did you kill her? And we see him kind of out of frame pull up the picture of Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
And he looks at it, and then after he looks at it, the camera cuts so that we're looking at the same photo right up close. And it's that black and white photo of Laura. I don't think it's the same one we saw earlier in season 1.
Yeah.
But we know he has at least one, now maybe 2 photos of Laura in his office.
Yes.
And he just says, I loved her. He did not kill her.
He does not say he did not kill her.
He says, I loved her. Yeah.
But it's
heavily implying.
Yeah.
And now that we kind of know where things lead later, more implication. But he says, I loved her, and that's his answer. Mm-hmm. And as soon as she gets this information from her father, Audrey does not hesitate to go straight to Cooper. Mm-hmm. She goes straight to Cooper, tells her what her father told her very clearly, and that information combined with what Cooper had seen in the scattered pages of Laura's secret diary that Laura wrote that one day she's going to tell the world about Benjamin Horne.
Yes.
That was enough for Cooper to spring on that.
Now, with that, he also, like I mentioned before with chemicals, he points, Cooper is going to probably make some long strides like this point with Ben while he tries to search for this answer. It's either A, I think that the one-armed man already did point, but it was just in the general direction of the Great Northern. And I think that he's now trying to grasp at conclusions. Secondly, he said, like the giant said that at this third point, like he will find his ring again. But there's no ring yet. No, there's no sign of this ring. Mm-hmm. So it might be far off in the future when we finally get the without chemicals he points. So I'm looking forward to a lot of Cooper mistakes as he just tries to...
I want Cooper to fail.
He reacts very quickly, if you will. Sometimes with too much thought and sometimes not enough, if you will.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting for him to either discover the balance or falter trying.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of faltering, as Benjamin Horne is approached by the sheriff and by Cooper, They say they're going to take him in, and he's like, "I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can you be a bit more specific?"
Which, by the way, it's with Tojimura saying
With Tojimura.
Yep, Jerry checked up, and let me say, I'm very excited for this deal. Once the paperwork starts, let's get going. Let's expedite this. I'm good to go.
Right. So when he's in the middle of this meeting, the police show up. He wants more information. Sheriff Truman just drops the bombshell. You're wanted in questioning for the murder of Laura Palmer.
Yes.
And Ben's reaction is basically like, "Go away.
Yeah,
Get out.
I love
go
this.
Now. You can go. I'm going to go get a sandwich."
No, I love this because he ends up just like looking at them and he's just like fidgeting. He's like, this is just insane.
Yeah, you're insane.
I can't even conceive this. And he goes to a sense of comfort because I imagine eating sandwiches through the middle is something he associates with comfort. Especially with that scene with Jerry.
Yeah.
Just like receding back into that, like I need that sense of comfort right now because I can't even like conceive this. You walked in the middle of one of the biggest like successful like deals I was about to make with this person who was just willing to like throw money at me.
Right.
And now that all might be ruined. I need my time. And he even like makes a threat towards them saying like he knows people in high places. Cooper, honestly, how can he even like go into this? And he even kind of like edges his voice on betrayal.
And as he's saying he's going to get a sandwich, he's going toward what we know is that secret door because that's where Hank has entered in the past.
He's entered. It might just be a simple side door. It might be a secret door, but regardless,
he's definitely going for an exit.
Yep, and he is quickly grabbed, and we just see him shout, no. And
the camera's very close on this. There's a lot of chaos visually.
Yeah, this is like Ben at his most raw.
And we know that by the end of the episode, it's been said that he was taken to a holding cell. So we have that to look forward to in the future episodes. Benjamin Horne is behind bars.
We've seen him fume with emotion, and we've seen him fume without emotion in the same episode. And
again, I want to stress this is my favorite episode of Twin Peaks so far, and it is pretty much every aspect why. Like there's not everything is why. It's the way shots move. There's a lot of panning, a lot of zooming, a lot of drawn out distance shots, but all to create distance with the viewer, but also very close-ups to create sort of chaos and intimacy.
Yes.
There's so much with the music and the ambiance, but it's also the acting. It's not just David Lynch, it's also the acting, it's the scripting from Mark Frost. And again, between the script, the directing, and the acting, the way Benjamin Horne is handled was fantastic.
Yes.
And I give Richard Bamer all the credit in the world for his portrayal of Benjamin Horne. I've mentioned before, I'm a big fan of Ben's character.
Yes.
So while the main stealing the show for me is definitely Ray Wise as Leland, I got to give props to pretty much everyone involved in this episode for what they brought to the table.
It was great. There was even this reaction as soon as like Ben was dragged out that Tojimura as well as his assistant kind of look at each other as like, well,
and that gets immediately recontextualized by what we learn about Tojimura. Now, we've had so many dense moments in this episode. This has been, I think, of all the podcasts we've done, this might be one of the more serious ones. I swear to you, normally we're cracking hilarious jokes all the time, but I like the idea that let's end on Tojimura. Let's end on this note.
Now, Kalil.
Yes.
Listeners, I wish that I had a lot of like my squeals, my overall ahs in a different time when I saw this episode. I wish that I could give you my direct reactions in the moment of what I experienced in this episode.
To catch up people who might be jumping into this episode, not having watched any previous ones yet, when we first met Tojimura, the professor's reaction was basically that this does not sound like an Asian man, let alone a man, let alone a human being.
Yeah, it was something in which like I was willing to go into lines of like, okay, this has to be like 3 children in a trench coat. This has to be a pile of laundry. This has to be someone faking overall.
You made Batman comparisons last time.
Yeah, because you know what? It was actually pretty enlightening when you were making the impression.
And I'm glad I could help. Because I cannot say anything. And that hurts me because I am not a very good liar. And I was so worried because a few episodes ago, you were grilling me outside the podcast because you wanted an answer on who played this character. And I was like, crap, I can't lie, but I also can't say Piper Laurie because that's the actress who plays Catherine.
Yeah, because
but
in the end...
Thankfully, they gave a fake name in the credits. That's why it took so long, Professor, to give you an answer, because I had to make sure they gave that person a name. So this whole, like, this fake name of Fumio, that's just an alias that only appears in Twin Peaks. That's why I said, don't look into the filmography of this actor.
Like, as far as, like, this goes, I was going crazy because I can't look up Twin Peaks things. I've been forbidden to look up Twin Peaks things. No, you can look up,
like, the vinyls, and that's about it. Like, you can't look even at the books you bought.
But,
you have the trading cards here. You can't look at them.
But, as far as, like, this went, it was like, this does not sound like an actor. I need Kalil to tell me, because Kalil has been open and saying, like, who the actors were, and he's been praising the actors, the writers, and for some reason, we were stopped at Fumio.
I'm so glad we can finally talk about this. It's been a burden on my shoulders.
Yeah,
because all the different things you're saying.
It was a burden on my shoulders. What the hell were you talking about? I was like looking at this person. I was like, this is a real person named Fumio. I feel so bad because saying like this person just doesn't sound like a person. This person looks very boxy as an individual. I was thinking to myself, I'm being horrible to this man.
To this shiny, boxy trenchman person.
Yeah, because I kept saying like this man seems fake, but that sounds cruel. But it turns out,
it is.
It is a fake man. It is.
And you know, okay, so again, it's one of those things that I think different viewers are going to handle it differently. When you mentioned how shiny he looks and everything like that, I'm just like, wow, the makeup must have really shined, through for her. And again, I think it's a credit to how good of a job they did. That even after all the HD Blu-ray, we've talked before about how sometimes in the remastering, certain things are more noticeable of goofs or just missteps. The fact that you were still tricked over 25 years later, they did a good job with the makeup and costuming.
Oh boy. Could you even call it a trick? Because I was catching on in some respects.
You were catching on, but you did not know that it's a woman.
No.
You did not know that was Catherine, a main character of season 1.
No, I did not. And in the end, like watching the scene, like last podcast, I mentioned like maybe we might get some like Fumio cross Pete content.
I was going to write my fan fiction because they're a married couple. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's like there's the scene like Tajimura is just in Pete's house. It's like we had one interaction. What the hell, Fumio?
Well, and it's funny because...
And he's just like, now Pete is completely like alone in his household. Josie is gone. Like, Catherine is quote-unquote gone.
Yeah.
And like, Fumio just appears, or I'm sorry, either way, let's say whatever name we want at this point. And he just like slowly approaches in the dark while like Pete is getting himself like cookies and milk ready. And before like a moment happens, like he goes in for like a hug, a grapple before it's revealed it's a big old smooch. I'm like, oh God, Fumio, what's happening here?
Coming on a little heavy. I mean, we all feel that way about Pete, but come on.
He even said, like, there's something irresistible about you. And I'm like, okay, well, this is an interesting turn. Like, and Pete was like, no, listen. Like, he's clearly shocked. And, like, this voice pops up. It's like, I know that voice. Where is it from? And then she's like, it's me, dummy. Catherine?
Yeah, and it's so funny because the last time it was dark and a man in Twin Peaks was attacked by an Asian person, it was Hank who got like horribly assaulted at the diner and just completely just destroyed his ego and physical. He almost died. So when Tajimura shows up for Pete and he just gives him the big old bear hug and smooch, it's quite a turnaround.
It is quite a turnaround. I have to say, like, one thing, it seems that at the very least, the love between Catherine and Pete seems at least a little rekindled.
It rekindled the flame.
Yeah.
So now you understand when the last episode that Tajimura was talking to Ben saying, I know a thing about fire. That has a new meaning to it.
Yeah, but at the same time, Nagasaki? Why'd bring up Nagasaki like that?
As a cover. It's a terrible cover.
It's a terrible cover.
But again... It's to instill even subconsciously to Ben. She's not willing to, like, she's putting on an act, and she's very good at hiding the fact that she's having emotions, because when Ben is carried away by the police, you know Catherine's laughing inside. You know Catherine is enjoying that she gets a front row seat to Ben's downfall. But the fact that she couldn't resist the episode before when they're talking, she had to throw that little quip in there that I know a thing or two about fire. Because the last time Ben interacted with her, he was trying to kill her in a fire.
Yeah.
And now all the scenes with Ben, all the scenes with Pete, you know now.
Yeah, with Catherine and Shelly that were stuck inside there with Pete going in and we seeing Shelly get out, I have no clue how the scene played in which Catherine would be there. I imagine that a lot of the makeup and potentially this new guise might be to cover up maybe some burns. I don't know what happened to Catherine, whether or not she hid out or escaped on her own.
Well, if you think about what she did, she gave the check to Ben. She has plans, obviously, of some kind.
She has plans.
And she waited until the moment that Ben was behind bars to reveal herself to Pete.
Now, as far as it goes, like the depiction of Catherine as a Japanese man is definitely an elephant in the room.
I mean, the question is, like, I could see someone. Okay, I could see someone. I don't think this is where you're taking it, but maybe you are. I could see someone being offended. Yeah. Because there's a controversy of the idea of blackface, of someone, mimicking with makeup and attire and voice a different ethnic background or race or nationality. And the idea here that she is putting on the image of an Asian man to fool people, I could see someone having a problem with it. I do not at all. And if someone does have a problem with that element, that's valid. That's
actually a point that I was going to bring through. But then again, with the Japanese people, there's actually some trends that come up in which like people in Japan, at least in the past, I know, have dyed their skin because they find some different skin colors very trendy. Yes. So I don't know where the offense may come from just because of seeing like points of that inside Japanese culture in the past. Maybe I don't know how current day Japan is though.
Yeah, I just don't think this is an example of offensive blackface. It's not used in any way negative that I see it.
Except I would say that the only point that might be negative, that might be a little bit insensitive, might be I was in Nagasaki.
Yeah, it depends if you think that that's too soon. Yeah. Or just something you never joke about.
Or something like saying that your pain was like someone else's pain that one may not know. Yeah. So.
But all in all, I really don't personally have an issue with it.
Okay.
But I think someone could, and that's valid.
Yes.
I do like, though, that Pete's words to Catherine after she reveals herself. He says, "You look terrible. You look just terrible." And they kind of laugh it out at the end. Again, in an episode with so much darkness and so much seriousness, glad someone's having a good time.
Overall, I'm excited to see the next episode myself because I want to follow up on that. I'm already enjoying this new dynamic with Pete and Catherine actually having somewhat of a fondness for one another.
Yes.
They seem to play off each other well even at these few seconds.
So I said right off the bat that this is one of my favorite episodes, in the series. It's my favorite episode up until now, at least. How did you feel about this episode?
I loved it.
Is it your favorite? Or too soon to say?
Too soon to say. If I end up counting upwards again.
Because I know in the season 1 retrospective, you said they keep getting better and better and better.
There's a lot of episodes in this one, so
Has
maybe
season
that might
2
be
lived up to that for you?
So far, yes.
Okay.
It has been building up the various mysteries. There haven't been any threads that I've been necessarily disappointed on. And for this episode, it definitely had a lot of reveals to make me think. Especially since, apparently we have a lot more to cover.
And again, you don't know what that means, but the fact that, we're not even halfway through season 2, and there's still an 18-part return that was made, in 2017, years and years and years and years later. So, tons of mystery await. If you are listening to us for the first time or you're a long-time listener, thank you for giving this podcast a chance. We appreciate being able to do this and talk to you about Twin Peaks on a, every other week basis.
Yes.
If you have any input on the podcast, on Twin Peaks, on the professor's theories and thoughts, on any of my wrong hot takes.
Oh, how adorable some of our voices are.
You can email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com, or you can tweet a Twitter tweet at us at twitterwebsite.com at the Twitter handle at snakeeyedreams1. The numeral 1, not owe any.
You know what? You just send us how your day's going. Honestly, I love interactions like it, and anything that
It's
Kalil
one of the
can
best
toss me.
parts. I think almost anyone who does a podcast or a YouTube series like that can say one of the best parts is hearing from fans.
Yes.
And for us, that is very much true. It's such a main drive. We love doing this. Even if no one watched it, we would still love doing this because we love Twin Peaks and we love making this kind of content.
Yes.
But it's very, very fulfilling. Just even a quick comment. You don't have to blow our minds with your amazing ideas, or you can. Either way,
Or
I'd love
you
to hear
can.
from you.
I'd be fine
I'm
with
open
that.
either way here. So go ahead and let us know. We also do have a YouTube channel where we post this podcast. You might even be listening to it there. But check us out there. You can leave comments there if you prefer to leave it in that format.
Yes.
We always like to end on this. And I think we'll continue doing this even after this episode. But I do have to ask, as always, Professor, who killed Laura Palmer?
Now, it's very likely we have a little bit of Leland here. But again, I don't know how the parasite behaves. I do not know if it's going to just be directly with Leland and Bob alone. So it's strongly leaning in which it is Bob and Leland, but we only have snippets of that. So at this moment, Bobland. But I'm not
Welcome
100%
to Bobland,
Bobland.
where there's always music in the air.
Which do you prefer, Bobland or Leo Bob?
I like Bobland.
Bobland is fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a theme park where all the rides are roller coasters that kill you.
Yes.